everybody, Anthony Taormina here, Editor-in-Chief of GameRant.com with a video game preview for you today of South of Midnight, the upcoming game on Xbox from Compulsion Games. I got the chance to play just a tiny bit of it. So we got to see one chapter, chapter 3, a big fish. I think the main purpose of the preview was to get you acquainted with the combat, the traversal, the world, the art, the design, kind of the vibes of the game overall, to get you excited for when it eventually releases in April. Overall, I came away very, very impressed with what I saw and played. I couldn't stop thinking about it after I finished it. I really enjoyed pretty much everything that I saw. I do think that there are some areas that I'm not too sure of, but also getting thrown into the game, not at the beginning, is always a weird thing. You're kind of trying to understand the mechanics. You're trying to get a sense of this world. They did give us enough information about the backstory up until that point, so I did understand where I was narratively, but gameplay-wise, I hadn't done that sort of slow ramp up to, okay, here's how this works. So it took me a little bit to get used to, and there weren't a ton of opportunities for combat, but that is one of the things that I have a little bit of questions of, although I do think there's a lot of creative elements going on. But first we'll kick off with the design of the game, the look of the game. It's just a stunning game. In trailers, you see the kind of stop motion animation vibes of South of Midnight. It's trying to cut frames out in the animations of the characters to give this feel of this is a stop motion animation production. It's not as present in the gameplay. You play as this girl named Hazel, who she's looking for her mom. Her house has been swept away with her mom, but she also finds that she has a deeper connection with some mystical elements that has to do with weaving as a central theme. Both the gameplay, the collectibles, a lot of it has to do with this idea of threads. You're doing things like unraveling. And a lot of the naming conventions are related to threads like tangles and knots. So there's this mystical element. You're tapping into some fantastical elements as you're looking for your mom. And as evidence from trailers you may have seen, but also the title of the chapter 3, a big fish. You're seeing this big giant catfish. And the design of the world has some cool things, like there were these giant peaches peppered around and elements floating, and some things are not in reality and you have to make them tangible, and that works into the traversal. It's got a look that's unlike anything you've seen in a video game. The use of kind of like late sun, maybe like dusk, was really cool in the chapter. There's a moment where the sun's kind of coming through the trees of like the south. It has a very specific look that you'll recognize, but it's created or recreated so well in the video game. I just love everything about the look of this game, and the movement and the world got so many familiar elements, but also it just feels like something that's familiar to other media, but you rarely see in a video game, and I appreciate that a lot. So combat in South of Midnight is kind of straightforward hack and slash with powers. It's where I have the most questions because how it comes together requires a better understanding of the powers, and we were kind of thrown into it for this, preview. Hazel has these little hooks, and she's slashing at enemies. There's a few different enemy types available. There's like a melee guy, there's like a big nest that sends out bugs, and then there was these kind of chunky launcher ranged type enemies, and so you're hacking at them and they'll attack back, and there's a dodge, so you can dodge their attacks. They'll sort of telegraph their attacks on screen with like a startup animation. Sometimes there'll be like a red icon to say oh, those ranged ones are about to shoot, and here's the path of the projectile. You need to get out of the way. But also, if they're off screen, there'll be a little indicator on screen, hey, they're about to attack. So you can dodge and just kind of prevent yourself from taking damage. But if you time that dodge perfectly, you'll kind of send out a little damaging blast that will hurt them. So it really does reward that. As far as what I saw, there's no parry or anything like that. So it is a dodge and then attack. But you're mixing and matching in these powers as you're attacking. So I had access to 3 powers. One was kind of like a stun or like a debuff. You would hit an enemy and they would turn gray or have like a grayish tint to them because the environment itself has this it's not solid yet. It's got like the faintest hint of being made of little threads, and then you can actually hit it with your it was the left bumper ability and make it tangible for like a platform to jump on. But in combat, you're sending that out and it's kind of stunning the enemy, and you can do more damage with upgrades and things like that. And then your other ability is like a pull, so you're sending your kind of needle and thread out and it's pulling the enemy in. And then the other one is like a push, but it also can do damage with upgrades as well. So one of the things that you could do with that nest that I was telling you about, it sends out bugs. You could actually use the push. You could use the pull to grab one of the bugs and then throw it back at the nest or throw it at an enemy. The ranged guy, he would shoot up like an attack that would kind of slowly come towards you, so you could use the push and that would send it back at them. You didn't need to grab it and send it back, you just push. And all three of those abilities are on cooldown, so meanwhile you're doing your melee attacks, you're doing your dodges, and you're kind of finding a way to mix and match that. And though it's a little familiar in terms of combat encounters and melee combat for a video game, I think the visual style, the conceit of the powers being thread-based or weaving-based makes it interesting. And then there's also an upgrade path to kind of decide how do you want to further modify those abilities. I only unlocked like a few upgrades. One of them, for example, made it so that the push doesn't just push the enemies away, it actually damages them, things like that. The combat arenas are structured so that, I don't know if this is going to be true throughout the full game, but there was a little place to get health, so you could get health one time. But also you're kind of doing in your progress through the combat is each of the enemies has a health bar, but once you've depleted that health bar, they are in this kind of like finishable state. And then you go up to them, you press Y in the case of playing on Xbox, and you unravel them. You're sort of like ripping them apart, and that will release a little health as well. So you are getting health for defeating enemies, in addition to there'll be one kind of like health pod in the combat arenas. And you're just mixing and matching that. There's different enemy types. It is kind of hectic. It's a little hard to kind of manage all these enemies that are on the screen. Some will attack you from the side, from behind. The indicators are clear, but it did take me a bit to get used to, and by then the chapter was over. So once I really got into a groove, I thought, okay, let me go back, and I played through the chapter again, and I did much better. And I really got to familiarize myself with the combat, and I had a lot more fun. But I do think I will need to see how it evolves, and I will need to see how the upgrades work, whether the powers get modified, do you get different powers or anything like that, to make a final judgment on the combat. The combat itself it's got this setup where, okay, this is an area where you're gonna go into combat. I wasn't encountering enemies while I was doing the traversal or doing the kind of just exploration. It was, okay, this is a combat area. I don't know if that's true for the full game, but in this chapter, that was what it was. It was, this is an area where you're gonna fight and then you're done. That usually led into story stuff. So talking about the story, the chapter saw you get up to the catfish, the big giant catfish, and he was trapped and you're trying to release him. You don't really know how you're going to release him. You can see visually that it kind of looks like he's being held by like a giant hand. You don't know what the story is there. I'm not going to spoil anything, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but what you're essentially doing is you're meeting a character, you're learning their backstory. You are interacting with the world in such a way that learning how certain things came to be in this particular area, not necessarily related to the fish, but you're meeting some interesting characters. There was a character named Rhubarb and a character named Benji that you're learning their story. And that kind of feeds into freeing the catfish. And I thought writing in the game is really good. The concepts in the game are really, really creative, and the way it all came together just in this one chapter, I was captivated throughout. I found myself being very excited about finding out what was next, peeling back the layers of this story, but at the same time, it was informing what I was doing in the gameplay outside of combat. Like the traversal, you're going to the next area and you're getting the next bit of story. So traversal in the game is jump, dash, glide, pretty much exclusively is what I experienced. Until the very end, I unlocked the ability to wall run, so then that kind of came into it. There's usually a gap. You want to get across it, you would double jump, and if it was a little further, you would double jump, then hold B, and you'd kind of dash, and then you'd hold this little parachute looking thing would come out, like you would weave it, so to speak, and you would hold on to it to kind of float down. So you could traverse longer gaps with that combination of the double jump, the glide, and then the floating down. And then the wall run added that element of, okay, I'm walking along the wall, and then I double jump, and then I glide and get to the next wall. Familiar stuff, not really reinventing the wheel. Visually, though, the world design is what makes that stuff feel unique. But you were going around there, and there were different places you could go off the beaten path, and you would find these, they're called floofs. You collect those, and that's your currency to spend on upgrades. So you had to kind of see what you were doing to go forward, and then looking around and going, okay, well, where else can I go? But yeah, the traversal, similar to the combat, has a familiar feel, but it is the design of the game that makes the difference and makes it stand out. Overall, what I played of South of Midnight left me really, really excited to see more, play more. It's not too far away. There's something really special about the look, the feel of the game, and in particular, the use of music. So in the chapter, there's kind of a climactic moment, and there's a very good like needle drop where the music really swells up, and it actually ties into the narrative, and it fits with what you're doing traversal wise. It's a really great moment. I don't want to spoil any of the kind of firm details about it, but it was really cool. And I hope that the game does this a lot, because it would make for something that you're really looking forward to and kind of punctuates the chapters. There's just so much about South of Midnight that I find engaging and exciting. And even if there are familiar elements, I don't think that those weigh the game down or didn't weigh down my preview. It left me wanting to see more, to see how the combat evolves, see how the traversal evolves. The story itself, I want to know more. I want to be immersed in the lore and get all the backstory on all the characters and see how it goes. But unfortunately, we only got to experience one chapter, and they left us hanging for sure. But it left a good impression on me nonetheless, and I'm really looking forward to South of Midnight. So that's it for my preview of South of Midnight. Thanks for watching. I'm very excited for the game. It comes out this April on Xbox Series X and S and PC. So look forward to more coverage of South of Midnight on GameRant.com in the next months, and a final review when the game releases in April. Thanks for watching. I've been Anthony Taormina, Editor-in-Chief of GameRant.com. Bye-bye.